Have you ever wondered what really happens to our minds and hearts as we age? Not just the obvious changes that everyone talks about, but those subtle shifts that catch us off guard, the ones that sneak up on us when we least expect them. Today, we're going to dive deep into the first part of our journey exploring the 13 unpleasant truths about aging that nobody really talks about, but everyone needs to hear. Let me share a story about Sarah, a woman I met during one of my speaking engagements. At 68, she carried herself with grace, but behind her warm smile lay a burden she'd been carrying for decades. I had a chance to teach abroad in my 30s, she told me, her voice tinged with something deeper than just nostalgia. I turned it down because I thought it was too risky, too uncertain. Now, 30 years later, I still think about that decision almost every week. Sarah's story touches on our first truth, the way we start dwelling on past regrets. It's not just about remembering what happened, it's about how these memories begin to haunt us, showing up uninvited during quiet moments, coloring our present with shades of what could have been. That promotion we didn't take, the relationship we didn't fight for, the dreams we put aside for what seemed like more practical choices, these become more than memories. They transform into what I call emotional anchors, keeping us tethered to moments we can't change. You see, the real danger isn't just the time we spend looking backward, it's how these regrets start to poison our present moments and paralyze our future choices. Think about it, how many times have you stopped yourself from trying something new because a past failure whispered warnings in your ear? How often have you held back from joy today because of yesterday's disappointments? But here's what I want you to understand, and this is crucial. Your past decisions were made by a different version of you, one who had different information, different circumstances, and different wisdom than you have today. Judging your past self with your present knowledge isn't just unfair, it's a form of emotional self-sabotage. This leads us to our second truth, one that often sneaks up on us so quietly we don't even notice it happening. I'm talking about how we become increasingly resistant to change. Margaret, one of my dear friends in her early 70s, captured this perfectly when she told me, "I didn't realize I was becoming resistant to change until my grandson tried to teach me how to video chat. I found myself saying, 'I'm too old for this' before I even tried." That's when it hit me, I wasn't too old, I was too afraid. This resistance to change often disguises itself as wisdom. We call it knowing what we like or sticking to what works. But let's be honest with ourselves for a moment, isn't it sometimes just fear wearing a mask of certainty? The world moves forward whether we choose to move with it or not. Technology evolves, social norms shift, and new ways of thinking emerge. When we resist these changes, we're not protecting ourselves from the unknown, we're gradually isolating ourselves from the world as it exists today. And you know what's fascinating? This resistance to change often intertwines with our third truth, the way we start building invisible walls between ourselves and others. These aren't physical barriers, they're emotional ones, constructed so gradually that we often don't notice them until they've become almost impenetrable. I remember Tom, a retired executive who came to one of my workshops. He couldn't understand why his adult children seemed distant. "I provided everything for them," he said, his voice heavy with confusion and hurt. "I gave them the best education, supported their careers. But now, they barely share anything meaningful with me." What Tom didn't realize was that over the years, he had built walls of expectations, judgments, and unspoken disappointments that made genuine connection increasingly difficult. These invisible walls take many forms. Sometimes they're built from pride, we don't want to admit we need help or emotional support. Other times, they're constructed from fear, fear of vulnerability, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as old or dependent. And sometimes, they're built from a misguided attempt to protect ourselves from hurt or disappointment. But here's the cruel irony: these walls that we build to protect ourselves often end up becoming our prisons. They keep out not just the potential for hurt, but also the possibility of deep connection, understanding, and love. This brings us to our fourth truth, and in many ways, it might be the most corrosive of all: the tendency to harbor silent resentments. These aren't the loud, obvious grievances that we're conscious of. Instead, they're the quiet, persistent thoughts that nibble away at our peace of mind: the child who doesn't call enough, the friend who seems to have forgotten us, the spouse who doesn't understand our needs without being told. Clara, a woman in her mid-60s, shared something with me that perfectly illustrates this point. "I spent 3 years being angry at my daughter for not visiting more often," she confessed. "I never said anything. I thought if she really cared, she would just know. One day, I finally broke down and told her how I felt. That's when I learned she'd been staying away because she thought her busy life with 3 kids would be too chaotic for me to handle. All that time wasted, all that hurt, just because I chose to resent rather than communicate." You see, silent resentments are particularly dangerous because they feed on themselves. The longer we hold them, the more justified they seem, and the harder they become to express or resolve. They're like rust on the soul, corroding our relationships and our happiness while remaining largely invisible to others. What makes these 4 truths, dwelling on past regrets, resistance to change, building invisible walls, and harboring silent resentments, so important to understand is how they work together, creating a web that can trap us in patterns of thinking and feeling that dim the brightness of our later years. But here's the beautiful thing: recognizing these patterns is the first step to changing them. Think of your mind as a garden. Every thought, every emotion, every reaction is like a seed we plant. We can either cultivate regrets, resistance, walls, and resentments, or we can nurture understanding, adaptability, openness, and honest communication. The choice, as always, remains ours. If you're still with me in finding value in these insights, please take a moment to comment with a 1 below. In our next section, we'll explore how these mental patterns affect our social connections and relationships, and more importantly, what we can do to build more fulfilling connections in our later years. Remember, understanding these truths isn't about dwelling on the negative aspects of aging. It's about recognizing the patterns that hold us back so we can break free from them and create the rich, fulfilling life we deserve, no matter our age. Stay with us, because what comes next might just change how you think about the relationships in your life, and the simple yet powerful ways you can transform them for the better. Now that we've explored the internal changes that come with aging, let's talk about something that affects us all deeply: the way our relationships and social connections begin to shift as we grow older. What I'm about to share might feel uncomfortable at first, but understanding these changes is crucial for maintaining meaningful connections in our later years. I want to tell you about Michael, a retired professor who reached out to me after one of my seminars. He described how his social circle had gradually shrunk over the years, not because people had moved away or passed on, but because he had slowly stopped nurturing these relationships. "I used to have lunch with colleagues every week," he told me, his voice heavy with realization. "Then it became every month, then only on special occasions. Now, I can't remember the last time I called any of them." This brings us to our 5th truth about aging: the way we begin neglecting our deep connections. It happens so gradually that we barely notice it at first. A missed phone call here, a rain check on a coffee date there. We tell ourselves we're just busy, or tired, or that we'll catch up soon. But days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and before we know it, relationships that once felt unbreakable begin to fade away. What makes this particularly challenging is that we often don't realize the value of these connections until they're already starting to slip away. We assume that true friendships can withstand any amount of neglect, that they'll always be there waiting for us when we're ready to engage again. But relationships, even the strongest ones, are like gardens, they need regular tending to flourish. I remember Maria, a vibrant woman in her 70s, who shared something profound with me. I used to think that having lots of acquaintances on social media meant I wasn't lonely, she said. But one day, when I needed someone to talk to about my fears and doubts, I realized I had plenty of connections but very few real relationships. Her words highlight a crucial distinction, the difference between being connected and being truly connected. This naturally leads us to our sixth truth, one that often creeps up on us without warning, the tendency to judge younger generations with increasing harshness. We've all heard it, maybe we've even said it ourselves, young people today don't understand the value of hard work, or, in my day, we knew how to show respect. These judgments might feel justified in the moment, but they create invisible barriers between us and the very people who could bring new energy and perspectives into our lives. Let me share a powerful story about James, a man in his late 60s who had grown increasingly critical of his grandchildren's generation. He couldn't understand their attachment to technology, their different views on work and life balance, their ways of communicating. But everything changed when his 15-year-old granddaughter took the time to show him how she was using technology to create digital art. I was ready to dismiss it all as a waste of time, he admitted, but watching her explain her creative process, seeing her eyes light up with passion, it reminded me of how I felt at her age when I discovered photography. I realized I wasn't really judging their tools or methods, I was resistant to understanding their world. You see, when we fall into the habit of judging younger generations, we're not just pushing them away, we're closing ourselves off from learning and growth. Every generation faces its own unique challenges and develops its own ways of navigating the world. When we dismiss these differences instead of trying to understand them, we miss out on opportunities to stay connected to the evolving world around us. This brings us to our seventh truth, one that becomes increasingly common as we age, the tendency to create echo chambers in our social lives. It's natural to want to surround ourselves with people who share our views, experiences, and memories. There's comfort in being with those who get us, who remember the same cultural touchstones and share similar perspectives on life. But here's the thing about echo chambers, they might feel safe and comfortable, but they can slowly suffocate our growth and understanding. When we only interact with people who think like us, talk like us, and share our same life experiences, we're not just limiting our exposure to new ideas, we're gradually disconnecting from the rich tapestry of human experience that makes life interesting and meaningful. I think about Rose, an 80-year-old woman who made a conscious decision to join a mixed-age book club at her local library. At first, I only wanted to discuss the classics I knew and loved, she told me. But listening to younger readers interpret these books through their modern lens, and being introduced to contemporary authors I would have never discovered on my own, it's like I'm seeing the world through fresh eyes. Yes, sometimes we disagree, sometimes their perspectives challenge my long-held beliefs, but that's exactly what keeps my mind active and my heart open. What Rose discovered is something vital for all of us to remember: diversity in our social connections isn't just about being inclusive, it's about staying vital and engaged with life itself. When we limit our social circles to only those who mirror our own thoughts and experiences, we're not protecting ourselves from discomfort, we're depriving ourselves of the very interactions that could keep us mentally sharp and emotionally rich. The impact of these three truths, neglecting deep connections, judging younger generations, and creating echo chambers, goes far beyond just our social lives. They affect our mental health, our emotional well-being, and even our cognitive function. Research has shown that maintaining diverse social connections and engaging with different perspectives helps keep our minds flexible and our spirits young. But here's the good news, understanding these patterns is the first step to changing them. It's never too late to reach out to an old friend, to bridge the generation gap with curiosity instead of judgment, or to step outside our comfortable social circles. Every day offers new opportunities to deepen our connections and broaden our perspectives. If you're finding value in these insights, please take a moment to comment with a 2 below. In our next section, we'll explore how these social patterns connect to our physical habits and lifestyle choices, and I'll share some practical strategies for maintaining both our relationships and our vitality as we age. Remember, the goal isn't to fight against these natural tendencies, but to recognize them when they appear so we can make conscious choices about how we want to engage with the world and the people around us. Stay with me, because what comes next might just change how you think about your daily habits and their impact on your ability to stay connected and engaged in your later years. Before we dive into this next section, I want you to think about something that happened to Robert, a friend of mine who recently turned 70. One morning, he noticed a persistent pain in his knee. Nothing severe, just a dull ache that wouldn't go away. It's probably nothing, he told himself. It'll pass on its own. Weeks turned into months, and that small discomfort grew into something that affected his daily walks, his gardening, and eventually, his willingness to leave the house at all. This brings us to our 8th truth about aging, the way we start ignoring those little warning signs our bodies send us. It's not that we're unaware of them. No, it's something more complex than that. We begin to develop what I call a selective relationship with our health. We convince ourselves that certain changes are just part of getting older, that they're not worth mentioning or investigating. I've seen this pattern repeat itself countless times. We dismiss the slight shortness of breath when climbing stairs, wave away the increasing difficulty with reading small print, or normalize that nagging back pain that's been with us for months. We tell ourselves stories, everyone my age deals with this, or it's just part of getting older. But here's what we need to understand, while aging is natural, suffering in silence isn't. Think about Anna, a retired nurse who spent her entire career caring for others but struggled to acknowledge her own health needs. I kept telling myself I knew enough about healthcare to know what was serious and what wasn't, she shared with me. Then one day, I ignored what I thought was just ordinary indigestion, and it turned out to be something much more serious. That's when I realized, my medical knowledge was actually making me overconfident about dismissing symptoms. You see, this tendency to ignore warning signs isn't just about being stubborn or afraid. Sometimes it comes from a deeper place, a fear of losing independence, a reluctance to accept changes in our bodies, or even a kind of pride that tells us we can handle everything on our own. But our bodies are like sophisticated machines that have been running for decades. They deserve our attention, respect, and proper maintenance. This leads us naturally to our 9th truth, the gradual abandonment of physical activity. Now, I'm not talking about running marathons or lifting heavy weights. I'm talking about the way we slowly let go of movement itself, how we begin to choose the elevator over stairs, how we start driving short distances we used to walk, how we spend more and more time in our favorite chair. Let me tell you about David, who used to be an avid gardener. His backyard was his pride and joy, a beautiful space full of flowers and vegetables that he tended daily. But after a fall that left him shaken but not injured, he began to scale back his gardening. I told myself I was being careful, he said, but looking back, I was really just giving in to fear. The less I moved, the less I felt capable of moving, and the more I convinced myself that being sedentary was safer. What David discovered, and what many of us need to understand, is that movement is like a gift that keeps giving, but only if we keep using it. When we start avoiding physical activity, we're not just affecting our bodies, we're impacting our entire quality of life. Our world begins to shrink, not because we can't do things, but because we've convinced ourselves that we shouldn't. And this brings us to our 10th truth, one that might seem superficial at first but actually runs deep, the neglect of our personal appearance. Now, I'm not talking about trying to look like we're 30 when we're 70. I'm talking about something more fundamental, the way we sometimes begin to let go of the daily habits that make us feel good about ourselves. I remember Gloria, a woman I met at a community center. She told me how, after her husband passed away, she gradually stopped paying attention to how she dressed or groomed herself. I told myself it didn't matter anymore, that there was no one to dress up for, she shared. But what I didn't realize was that I was dressing down my own sense of self-worth along with my appearance. This neglect of personal appearance often goes deeper than just clothes or grooming. It's about how we present ourselves to the world and, more importantly, how we see ourselves. When we stop caring about our appearance, it's often a sign that we're disconnecting from our own sense of dignity and self-respect. What's fascinating is how these three truths, ignoring warning signs, abandoning physical activity, and neglecting personal appearance, are all interconnected. When we ignore our body's signals, we often become less active. When we become less active, we sometimes care less about how we look. And when we care less about how we look, we might be less likely to notice or act on health concerns. But here's the beautiful thing about understanding these patterns: we can break them at any point in the cycle. Every day offers us new opportunities to listen to our bodies, to move in ways that bring us joy, and to take care of our appearance in ways that make us feel good about ourselves. I think about Martha, who at 75 decided to challenge all these patterns at once. She started by scheduling a complete health checkup, something she'd been putting off for years. Then she joined a gentle yoga class, not because she wanted to become an expert, but because she wanted to stay mobile and strong. And finally, she began paying attention to her appearance again, not for others, but for herself. It wasn't about looking younger, she told me, it was about feeling like myself again. You see, taking care of our physical selves isn't about fighting against age, it's about honoring the bodies that have carried us through life. It's about maintaining our ability to do the things we love, to stay independent, and to fully participate in life for as long as possible. If you're finding these insights valuable, please take a moment to comment with a 3 below. In our next and final section, we'll explore perhaps the most challenging aspects of aging, how we think about our future and the legacy we want to leave behind. Stay with me, because understanding these patterns is just the first step in creating a more vibrant, engaged, and fulfilling life in our later years. Remember, it's never too late to start listening to our bodies, to move in ways that bring us joy, or to take pride in our appearance. These aren't acts of vanity, they're acts of self-respect and self-care that can profoundly impact how we experience our later years. As we enter this final part of our journey together, I want to share something that happened at one of my recent workshops. Eleanor, a retired accountant, stood up and said something that stunned the entire room into silence. "I spent 40 years planning other people's finances," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "but now, at 73, I realize I've been avoiding my own financial reality. I'm terrified about my future, but I'm even more terrified to look at it closely." This brings us to our 11th truth about aging, the way we sometimes avoid confronting our financial reality. It's not that we don't know money matters. Of course we do. But there's something about looking too closely at our financial future that can feel overwhelming, especially as we age. We might check our bank statements, pay our bills on time, and even have some savings, but many of us avoid really diving deep into what our financial future might look like. I remember John, a retired teacher who always prided himself on being careful with money. "I thought having some savings meant I was prepared," he told me. "But when my wife needed specialized medical care, I realized I had never really calculated what our actual needs might be. I had been operating on assumptions and hope rather than real planning. You see, avoiding our financial reality isn't just about numbers in a bank account. It's about the freedom and dignity we want to maintain in our later years. It's about having choices when we need them most. When we avoid looking at our financial situation clearly, we're not just avoiding numbers, we're avoiding crucial decisions about our future quality of life. This leads us naturally to our 12th truth, the habit of postponing important decisions. And I'm not just talking about financial decisions here. I'm talking about all those crucial conversations and choices we know we should be making but keep putting off for someday. Things like writing a will, making our healthcare wishes known, or discussing our preferences for future care with our loved ones. Linda, a woman in her late 60s, shared a powerful story with me about this. My mother had always been clear about what she wanted as she aged, she said. But I kept thinking I was too young to have those conversations with my own children. Then last year, a health scare made me realize, my silence wasn't protecting them, it was potentially burdening them with difficult decisions they might have to make without knowing what I would have wanted. The truth is, postponing these important decisions doesn't make them less necessary. It just makes them more challenging when they finally can't be avoided anymore. Every time we put off these crucial conversations or decisions, we're not just delaying a task, we're potentially compromising our own future well-being and adding stress to our loved ones' lives. And this brings us to our 13th and final truth, perhaps the most poignant of all, the regret of leaving things unsaid. Think about all the words of love, appreciation, or even forgiveness that we carry in our hearts but never quite manage to express. The stories we want to share, the wisdom we want to pass on, the feelings we want to convey but somehow keep tucking away for the right moment. I'll never forget Maria, an 82-year-old woman who came to me after losing her sister. We talked all the time, she said, tears in her eyes, but I never told her how much I admired her strength, how she inspired me to be brave in my own life. I always thought there would be time, that somehow she just knew. Now I realize, some things need to be said out loud, need to be put into words while we still have the chance. You see, as we age, we often accumulate a warehouse of unspoken words. Sometimes it's because we think there's plenty of time ahead. Sometimes it's because we're afraid of appearing vulnerable or sentimental. And sometimes, it's because we've convinced ourselves that the people in our lives already know how we feel, so why say it? But here's what I've learned through years of working with people in their golden years, those unspoken words have power. They have the power to heal old wounds, strengthen bonds, and create lasting memories. When we leave them unsaid, we're not just keeping our thoughts to ourselves, we're missing opportunities to create meaningful connections and leave lasting impressions on the hearts of those we love. These three final truths, avoiding financial reality, postponing important decisions, and leaving things unsaid, are interconnected in ways we might not immediately realize. When we avoid looking at our financial situation, we often also avoid making important decisions about our future. When we postpone these decisions, we sometimes also postpone important conversations. And when we postpone these conversations, we risk leaving important things unsaid. But here's the beautiful thing about understanding these patterns, we can start changing them today. We don't need to have all the answers or make all the decisions at once. We can start small. Maybe it's scheduling an appointment with a financial advisor, or having a conversation with our loved ones about our wishes for the future, or simply telling someone how much they mean to us. I think about Richard, who at 78 decided to write letters to each of his grandchildren, sharing not just his love for them but also the life lessons he hoped they would remember. I always thought I'd have time to tell them these things gradually, he said. But putting it in writing, making sure they would have my words even after I'm gone. It felt like one of the most important things I've ever done. As we wrap up our exploration of these 13 truths about aging, I want you to remember something crucial. Understanding these patterns isn't about dwelling on the challenges of getting older. It's about recognizing them so we can make conscious choices about how we want to live our later years. If you found value in these insights, please take a moment to comment with a "fourth" below. Your engagement helps us create more content that speaks to the real experiences and challenges we face as we age. Remember, every day offers us new opportunities to face our financial reality with courage, to make important decisions with clarity, and to speak the words that need to be spoken. It's never too late to start, and it's never too early to begin thinking about the legacy we want to leave behind. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this video has helped you understand yourself or someone you love a little better, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Together, we can create a community that supports and understands each other as we navigate the beautiful, challenging journey of aging.